Some call it boldness, others call it disrespect. When young conservative firebrand Karoline Leavitt hears a legendary judge publicly dismiss her as reckless with no grasp of real justice, she doesn't retreat. She steps into the spotlight, ready to prove that true authority isn't granted by time, it's earned through truth. What follows isn't just a clash of generations, it's a collision of legacy and courage that will change them both forever. The auditorium fell silent, that distinctive hush that follows decades of unchallenged authority. Judge Andrew Whitmore, retired yet still commanding reverence, positioned himself at the edge of Georgetown University's stage. His silver hair swept immaculately back, his voice deliberate and authoritative. Students inclined forward as he dissected historical cases, interspersing them with caustic remarks about today's unqualified rabble-rousers infiltrating politics. Then, with calculated dismissiveness, he added, "Consider that Karoline Leavitt, woman, passionate certainly, but dangerously impulsive, completely lacking any understanding of authentic justice." Backstage, Karoline Leavitt stood paralyzed. Her attendance had been unplanned. The Youth Political Summit organizers had requested her presence for a late afternoon panel, not to endure patronizing lectures. But when Judge Andrew's name surfaced, she carved out time. The man had presided on the bench longer than her entire lifetime, and now he was publicly undermining her credibility. She'd transcended her role as press secretary. After countless months defending the Trump administration, confronting celebrities, progressive judges, and even former first ladies, Karoline had transformed into an emblem, a symbol of a new conservative archetype, unyielding, formidable, yet profoundly principled. She brushed her fingertips against the silver cross pendant at her neckline, inhaled deeply, and addressed the assistant beside her. "Is he aware of my presence?" she inquired. The assistant, visibly anxious, shook his head. "None whatsoever. Want me to arrange your departure?" Karoline's lips curved slightly. "No, I believe I'll remain." Judge Andrew's voice resonated again. Authentic jurisprudence isn't dictated by emotions or social media phenomena. It's built upon precedent. It's rooted in discipline. It's embodied by individuals who've earned their standing. Karoline advanced into the wing, now visible to attendees. Several heads rotated, whispers cascaded throughout the chamber. The judge remained oblivious. The moderator, visibly uncomfortable, glanced nervously between them. We're privileged to have Karoline Leavitt in attendance," he stammered. "Perhaps she'd appreciate responding afterward?" Karoline's gaze narrowed. "No, not afterward." She strode forward, her heels striking the polished hardwood like a judge's gavel demanding order. "Actually," she declared, her voice unwavering, amplified for the entire assembly, "I believe now represents the perfect opportunity." Judge Andrew pivoted, astonished. The audience collectively held its breath. Karoline smiled, not from arrogance but with the tranquil determination of someone who recognized precisely what she intended to accomplish. She wasn't present to shout. She was there to demonstrate to a judicial veteran that he'd inadvertently challenged an exceptional adversary. Judge Andrew's eyebrows elevated marginally, the sole indication of surprise he permitted himself. "Well," he remarked deliberately, his resonant voice carrying subtle condescension. "Miss Leavitt, your presence was unexpected, particularly not on my platform." Karoline approached steadily, each movement purposeful, her gaze unwavering from his. "I hadn't anticipated being here," she stated, halting mere feet from the podium. "But when I discovered someone was exploiting their retirement to instruct the emerging generation about our supposed inadequacy, silence became impossible." The audience stirred. Certain students leaned eagerly forward, hungry for confrontation, while others exchanged apprehensive glances. Judge Andrew clasped his hands behind his back. "Miss Leavitt, I've devoted 4 decades to defending jurisprudence. I've sentenced murderers, safeguarded victims, and upheld constitutional principles. You've participated in politics for what, 2 years? What conceivable wisdom could you impart to me?" Karoline tilted her head slightly, smiling subtly. Perhaps nothing, or perhaps everything. That assertion electrified the atmosphere. She positioned herself alongside the judge, refusing subordinate placement, establishing equal footing. You maintained law transcends emotions. I concur, but it equally transcends ego and credentials. It centers on veracity. You correctly identified one aspect. Precedent matters. So let's examine precedent. She addressed the audience, her voice now commanding attention. The First Amendment wasn't crafted for the comfortable. It was designed for the audacious, for individuals expressing unpopular sentiments, people like myself. You label that recklessness. I call it quintessentially American. Applause erupted, initially sporadic, then swelling. Judge Andrew's eyes constricted. Audacity without wisdom breeds danger. You epitomize a generation acting before contemplating. Karoline rotated toward him, her tone cooling. And your generation occasionally contemplates so extensively, it neglects to act. Silence enveloped the room. She allowed it to linger before retreating slightly. You see, Judge, I don't repudiate your experience. I honor it. I simply reject that it grants you monopolistic claim to truth. The audience murmured, detecting momentum shifting. The judge observed her momentarily, then surprisingly inclined his head. You possess fire, but let's determine whether that fire burns pure or merely consumes. Karoline smiled. Judge Andrew leaned forward, gripping the podium's edges. His voice descended an octave, quieter yet sharper, resembling a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. You wish to discuss truth, Miss Levitt? Allow me to share one. Yeah. Chamber grew utterly still. Even students engrossed in their phones glanced upward. In 1993, he began, I presided over a case that haunts me still. A young girl, 13 years old, testified against her abuser. The courtroom overflowed. Defense counsel attempted to devastate her credibility. She remained unshaken. Ultimately, she stood and declared, even should you disbelieve me, I'll continue speaking. He paused significantly. We convicted the perpetrator, but that child didn't merely secure justice. She reminded me why I initially accepted the bench. Not to preserve institutions, but to protect people. Murmurs of agreement swept through the auditorium. Karoline remained motionless, respectfully silent. I worry, Judge Andrew continued, turning toward her, that your generation wields law as a weapon rather than a shield. That outrage supersedes justice, that every disagreement escalates into warfare. Karoline waited until he concluded, then advanced again. I've encountered that narrative previously, she said softly, because my mother relayed it to me. She was that 13-year-old girl. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Judge Andrew's eyes widened perceptibly. She described how the judge was stern yet equitable, that he truly listened, that he acknowledged her humanity. She never forgot your name. The silence intensified. Karoline drew a measured breath. You observed I've existed professionally for merely 2 years, but I've been molded by moments like that throughout my existence. When I speak today, it isn't to triumph in confrontation. It's because someone of your stature once restored my mother's voice. Judge Andrew's lips parted, yet produced no sound. Students leaned forward, utterly captivated. Karoline addressed the crowd. Experience holds significance, but legacy proves more consequential. Today's actions shape tomorrow's individuals, and forgetting this means losing everything. A solitary student began applauding, then others joined. Within moments, the entire auditorium reverberated with acclamation, not for conflict, but for unexpected connection. Judge Andrew regarded Karoline with newfound emotion. Respect. The applause gradually subsided, though its impact lingered. For the first time since Karoline's appearance on stage, Judge Andrew maintained silence, hands folded atop the podium. His expression had softened, not weakened, but reflective, a seasoned individual reassessing the encounter. Karoline avoided triumphalism. She simply retreated slightly, allowing silence its eloquence, A student in the second row whispered, "Did she just reveal the judge rescued her mother?" Another inclined forward, shaking his head incredulously. That revelation transformed everything. Judge Andrew eventually cleared his throat. "I never anticipated this," he admitted. "I never realized I held such significance to anyone." He paused, surveying the chamber. "Therein lies the peril, doesn't it? You serve for decades, pronounce verdicts, and forget that each verdict affects someone who might permanently carry your words." He looked directly at Karoline. "Your mother demonstrated extraordinary courage as a witness. If I provided her strength, she equally bestowed something upon me. Conviction." Karoline nodded quietly. "We never know who listens or who develops from our decisions." The moderator, visibly affected, finally intervened. "Perhaps we should welcome student inquiries." But no hands elevated. The audience remained motionless, emotionally entangled between generations, legacies, and ideologies. Then, a young woman, at the rear, obviously nervous, rose. "Miss Levitt," she began, voice quavering, "how do you manage those attempting to silence your narrative?" Karoline smiled compassionately. "I remember I don't speak in isolation, that whenever I maintain my position, someone else discovers courage to do likewise." She turned toward Judge Andrew. "And occasionally, someone you mistook for an opponent reveals themselves as fundamental to your foundation." Judge Andrew nodded gradually, his eyes glistening, expressed like someone comprehending words' weightiness. The audience remained subdued, no eruption necessary. The moment itself contained sufficient power. Behind them, a faculty member departed, discreetly, already contacting a journalist. "You won't believe what transpired at the civic engagement seminar." And at that moment, Karoline Leavitt and Judge Andrew, formerly adversaries, stood as equals, connected by a singular shared truth. Justice isn't merely enforced, it's transmitted. Later that evening, footage from the encounter had already begun, circulating across social platforms. Someone had captured the precise moment Judge Andrew's voice faltered, acknowledging Karoline's mother instilled conviction in him. The clip measured barely 20 seconds, yet proved extraordinarily powerful. By midnight, it had accumulated over 3 million views on X. The legacy theme trended worldwide. Conservative circles praised Karoline for her grace and emotional depth. Liberal commentators, many typically skeptical, acknowledged her effectiveness in bridging generational divides. "That wasn't politics," one user wrote. "That was history speaking through her." Meanwhile, inside a secluded diner on DC's outskirts, Karoline sat solitary in a booth, sipping black coffee while reviewing the clip. Not from vanity, but for clarity. Her phone vibrated, a message from her mother. "He remembered me. I'm weeping. Immensely proud of you." Karoline smiled, her eyes moistening. Then another notification appeared, this time from a Capitol Hill aide. "You've redirected the conversation. Karoline, prepare yourself for tomorrow. You're being quoted in tomorrow's Judiciary Committee session." She stared at the message momentarily, astounded. A personal moment of authenticity had transformed into national momentum. Simultaneously, in his tranquil Virginia residence, Judge Andrew sat in his study holding an aged photograph. It depicted his younger, more rigid self standing beside a nervous witness, Karoline's mother. His wife peeked inside. "That young woman today, she affected you profoundly, didn't she?" He nodded slowly. "She reminded me why I became a judge. Somewhere along my journey, I forgot." His wife placed a tender hand upon his shoulder. "Perhaps you were destined to forget so she could remind you." The following morning, Karoline stood before cameras at a Fox News studio, her cross necklace gleaming against her navy blazer. "Miss Levitt," the anchor began, "social media suggests you brought a judge to tears. How would you characterize yesterday's events?" Karoline remained steady. "I believe the system remembered its humanity. I didn't intend confronting a judge. I planned defending my truth. But occasionally, when executed properly, people astonish you." The anchor reclined, nodding. You've made history. Karoline knew better. History isn't created in a day, but truth requires just one voice to resonate. The atmosphere in the auditorium hung heavy with significance. Karoline Levitt resumed her seat deliberately, fingers tightly gripping her chair's armrest, her breathing controlled yet intense. Across the stage, Judge Andrew appeared visibly shaken, his shoulders no longer squared, his gaze lowered for the first time throughout the entire evening. The room's silence wasn't tense. It was reverential. Karoline's performance transcended. Mere rebuttal. It exemplified dignity and restraint forged through adversity. The evening hadn't concluded. The moderator, perceiving the room's transformation, leaned forward. "Judge Andrew," she inquired cautiously, "you've heard Miss Leavitt's revelation. Would you care to respond?" He cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim composure. "I've overseen hundreds of cases. I've served the justice system for decades, but perhaps I've forgotten. The system occasionally silences individuals rather than protecting them." His voice had quieted, stripped of its former authority. "Miss Levitt reminded me that courtroom dignity doesn't derive from titles. It emanates from truth." Light applause, scattered throughout, but all attention returned to Karoline, anticipating her next move. She rose unhurriedly, her posture confident, her voice subdued yet unmistakably resolute. "Judge Andrew, the system doesn't require flawless individuals. It needs courageous ones willing to acknowledge their oversights." Her tone lacked anger. It radiated determination, interwoven with hope. "I'm not present to win debates. I'm here. Ensuring stories like my uncle's aren't consigned to oblivion. He needed someone to listen when silenced. I'm merely guaranteeing that silence terminates tonight." In the front row, a woman gasped softly. Another dabbed tears with tissue. A teenager leaned forward, recording with her phone. But most sat motionless, moved not by spectacle but by authenticity. Judge Andrew's lips parted slightly, his voice cracked. "What befell your uncle? I should have recognized it. I should have intervened." Karoline approached the stage's edge, raising her chin slightly. "Then begin now," she said, "not by apologizing to me, but by advocating for others lacking microphones or titles. Utilize your voice while it remains available." The judge gradually stood. Time seemed suspended. He addressed the audience and stated clearly, "I shall, and I appreciate your..." Reminder of how the auditorium erupted in applause, not polite, not rehearsed, but raw and ascending like cresting waves. Students rose, clapped, some even called her name. Karoline didn't smile for attention. She simply placed her hand over her heart, where her silver cross necklace glinted, and nodded once, composed, dignified, undeniably victorious. Following the event, the university auditorium buzzed with emotion and vitality. Students filled the aisles, not rushing to exit but lingering, attempting to absorb what had transpired. Professors whispered amongst themselves. Campus journalists frantically recorded notes. Karoline Levitt stood quietly near the stage's edge, surrounded by young people waiting to address her, not seeking autographs but something deeper: understanding. One young man stepped forward, obviously nervous. "Miss Levitt," he said, "my brother serves as a Marine. He experienced something similar to your uncle. Nobody believed him, but when you spoke, it resembled hearing his voice." Karoline gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "Then your brother's voice just amplified," she said. "Tell him that and encourage him to continue speaking." Moments later, Judge Andrew approached again, this time not as challenger but as a transformed individual. His suit remained unchanged, but something in his bearing had softened. He extended his hand. "You didn't merely articulate truth," he said. "You restored something I never realized I'd lost." Karoline shook his hand. "Respect doesn't originate from benches. It stems from accountability," she replied. "If you meant what you expressed on stage, demonstrate it beyond these walls." "I will," he promised. Just as their conversation concluded, her phone vibrated. It contained a message from the White House Chief of Staff. "We witnessed the video. It's omnipresent. You transformed a lecture into a national moment. Prepare for media inquiries. Karoline glanced upward, her expression calm yet purposeful. She had entered that room prepared to defend her honor, her uncle's narrative, and her convictions. She had anticipated hostility, perhaps even dismissal. What she hadn't expected was initiating a conversation that would reverberate beyond those walls. Later that evening, clips of her exchange with Judge Andrew flooded X and YouTube. One video titled, "Karoline Leavitt Silences Federal Judge with Single." Story accumulated 500,000 views within hours. Commenters acclaimed her as generational voice, truth champion, and future American leadership. But Karoline ignored statistics. She drove homeward in silence, the silver cross around her neck catching passing headlights' glow. Her thoughts centered on her uncle and the promise she made during his final days, to never permit his voice forgotten. Tonight, she hadn't merely remembered it. She had amplified it. The following morning, ripple effects from Karoline's confrontation with Judge Andrew had expanded into waves. Conservative news outlets declared her the evening's moral victor. Liberal commentators, some reluctantly, acknowledged her message's power. But the most remarkable reaction emerged from veterans' organizations nationwide. Emails inundated her office. Messages from soldiers, Marines, and even retired generals arrived, thanking her for expressing truth many feared sharing. One message, signed simply Sergeant JP, read, "I served in Afghanistan. I witnessed things I still cannot discuss. What you said last night about post-service silence, it's authentic. You're among few who comprehend it, and that significance exceeds your knowledge." Moved deeply, Karoline responded personally, "Your service continues resonating. I merely amplified the truth you already embodied." Meanwhile, university administrators convened emergency meetings not from outrage but opportunity. The dean, previously skeptical about her appearance, now stated publicly, "Regardless of politics, Miss Leavitt reminded us that genuine debate incorporates personal experience, and sometimes students learn more from one unfiltered story than from countless lectures." Across campus, posters materialized overnight quoting her parting words to the judge. "Respect doesn't emanate from benches, it derives from accountability." Students shared the clip, edited with music, across TikTok and Instagram. It transcended viral moments. It became cultural phenomenon. Yet, amid everything, Karoline remained grounded. She returned to her office that afternoon and quietly positioned a new item on her desk, a folded American flag inherited from her uncle's funeral. She added a framed image from her confrontation with Judge Andrew, her hand mid-air, her expression firm, her words igniting change. Her aide entered carrying a note. A CNN producer had called. "They want you tonight. They say Judge Andrew already confirmed." Karoline didn't hesitate. She regarded the cross she perpetually wore, then the flag. "Inform them I'll attend," she said, "and this time I'll be posing the questions." The CNN studio lights felt colder than usual, casting clinical illumination across the set. Facing Karoline sat Judge Andrew, no longer robed but wearing tailored gray suit. His face, typically composed, appeared slightly paler. He glanced toward cameras, then back at Karoline, who sat upright wearing navy blue dress, the folded American flag pin gleaming on her lapel. The moderator began, but Karoline proceeded directly. She turned toward Andrew, her voice steady and precise. "Judge Andrew, last night you attempted teaching me about respect. Today I'd like instructing you about listening, about the silence you failed acknowledging." Andrew blinked, clearly unprepared. "Miss Leavitt." "No," she interrupted, calm yet firm. "You stated veterans shouldn't seek applause, but did you ever question what silence cost them?" She leaned forward, not aggressively but with conviction. "When I was 16, my uncle, Afghanistan veteran, returned home never discussing his experiences. He tried, we tried, but silence constructed walls, and eventually those walls enclosed him." The audience remained motionless. Andrew didn't interrupt this time. Karoline continued, her voice softening. That silence is effect. It doesn't humble, it haunts. You needn't applaud veterans, but when they speak, listen. That's not politics, that's decency. Momentarily, even cameras seemed breathless. Then, she added, you're not the first hiding behind robes and regulations to shame others into silence. But that era concludes. America isn't constructed upon silence. It's built upon voices, including youthful ones. Judge Andrew lowered his gaze. For once, he didn't counter. He didn't smirk. He simply nodded slowly. I erred, he said, barely audible. I believed honoring tradition, but perhaps forgot its genuine meaning. Karoline nodded once. It's not remembering flags, it's remembering those carrying them. The program ended in unexpected silence. Not tension, but reverence. Online, the moment trended instantly. Voices that matter became the evening's phrase. And for the first time publicly, Judge Andrew sent handwritten correspondence the following day, not to colleagues, not to courts, but to Karoline Levitt. Thank you for reminding even judges occasionally require judgment. Days following the on-air confrontation, the ripple effects proved undeniable. Networks replayed Karoline's speech alongside Judge Andrew's quiet admission of fault, rare vulnerability from someone known for decades of unwavering authority. In the White House press room, Karoline stood beside the podium, her tone composed, yet resonant with meaning. The silver cross adorning her neck rested gently above her navy blouse, gleaming beneath lights. This week, a former judge attempted silencing not merely myself, but the concept that youth lacks wisdom to impart. She began, her gaze unwavering. But we demonstrated otherwise, not through shouting louder, but through speaking truth. Truth, embedded in personal memory, patriotism, and pain too frequently overlooked. Reporters watched intently. Behind scenes, her words were already being captured, shared, and dissected. But Karoline didn't speak for virality. She spoke for those rendered voiceless. I never planned confronting judicial legends. But when our stories face dismissal as mere noise, silence isn't strength. It's surrender, and I refuse surrendering. That statement echoed online within minutes. Later that evening, Judge Andrew sat alone, surrounded by law books and vintage photographs. His desk held several letters, some supportive, others critical, but one distinguished itself. Handwritten. Note from young veteran. Sir, I watched you listen. That significance exceeds your understanding. Thank you. It affected him profoundly. He retrieved a pen and responded, Sometimes humility initiates wisdom. Meanwhile, Karoline received a message from Gold Star Mother in Missouri. Your voice represented my son, and for that, my gratitude. She framed it. The subsequent week, Judge Andrew agreed, addressing public forum on veterans' voices in jurisprudence, not as judge, but as listener. Seated beside him on the panel was Karoline Levitt. As they assumed their positions, Andrew turned toward her, offered subtle acknowledgement, and whispered, I arrived to teach, yet continue learning. Karoline smiled faintly, as do we all, and, in that moment, what originated as televised confrontation evolved into something greater, mutual recognition that authority without humility rings hollow, and even venerable judges learn from youthful voices with worthwhile stories. Sometimes single voices challenge legacies and single memories transform perspectives. Karoline Levitt didn't enter that studio to win arguments. She entered speaking for those silenced, dismissed, or forgotten. What followed transcended confrontation. It revealed truth. Judge Andrew believed experience taught him everything, but Karoline reminded him and society that wisdom transcends age, and truth doesn't always wear judicial robes. This narrative exceeds mere debate. It explores listening, bridging generational divides, and encourages power when silence seems easier. Because when experience meets honesty and pride encounters humility, transformation becomes possible. And Karoline didn't merely win rooms, she awakened them.